The area of the American Southwest known as the Four Corners has a heart, and that heart is the Colorado Plateau. The plateau covers 130,000 square miles, and 90% of it is drained by the Colorado River and its main tributaries, the Green, the San Juan, and the Little Colorado. It is a land of exuberantly wild country, mesas, mountains, and slick rock canyons. It has been walked over and lived in for at least 10,000 years, possibly longer. Clovis, basketmaker, anasazi, pueblo, the signs of their footsteps are everywhere. On the sandstone, in the alcoves, in the open, on canyon walls, and on rocks and boulders scattered about the landscape. We were here, the signs tell us. We were also here, they say. So now today, we are here also, retracing ancient steps and byways, peering into what remains of their architecture, marveling at the pottery sherds still scattered about, and staring with amazement and awe at rock walls and boulders, tattooed with images that challenge any kind of real understanding on our part. This is Muley Point, the southernmost end of a tableland of the Colorado Plateau known as Cedar Mesa. From here, you can gaze into the Valley of the Gods, the canyons of the San Juan River, and on the horizon, Monument Valley on the Navajo Reservation. The ancients left wonderful petroglyphs in this area, both at the top of the mesa and around the bottom. At the top, at Muley Point, we enter the world of these ancients by clambering down some boulders and slipping down through a crack in the sandstone, an appropriate entry. Like Alice through the looking glass, passing through the crack offers us an opportunity to visit another world. The ancients were connected to their landscape in a way that's difficult for most of us to imagine. They seemed to use the landscape to amplify their acts and intentions, and unlike our world, they didn't stress easy and safe. So following the steps, paths, and trails of these people is often not for the faint of heart.
We round the bend and suddenly catch sight of our destination. This site is called the birthing panel, and the reason seems pretty clear. You can even make out individual strands of hair on the newborn. Is that a copulating couple to the left of the birth? Is there a relation between them and the birth scene? And what of this comet-like zigzag trail ending in a notch above the birth scene? Or is it perhaps a snake? Or maybe lightning? To the right of the birth scene, we see a collection of glyphs that suggest perhaps a hunting theme, or perhaps general prosperity for the clan. We see bear prints and perhaps wolf tracks, and a man holding a snake, and this man with his phallus exposed. How are they related to the birth glyph, if at all? Here's a man with a duck for a head, next to a figure that looks something like a bodybuilder, next to a thin, almost stick-like flute player. What is their part in all this? In front of the birth glyph on this horizontal rock surface, we find a large collection of various animal prints, mixed in with a variety of shamanistic and hunting figures, the entire array giving the impression of, again, some kind of hunting activity or intention. Are these glyphs somehow related to the birthing scene? Were they created at the same time?
Although the symbology and intent were clear to the makers of these glyphs, we don't know the intent or meaning. Why they chose this particular place, we can't know. We can only look with amazement and wonder. Far down below Muley Point, at the base of these cliffs on the valley floor, are more glyphs to ponder in a field of boulders that fell from the cliff long before the ancients arrived here. And we get to this site by driving down the Moki Dugway, an exciting gravel road which is part of Highway 261 in Utah, built in 1958 for trucks hauling uranium ore from mines in Fry Canyon. The term Moki is from an old Mormon name for the anasazi, supposedly related to the word Hopi. It also gives us the term Moki steps, a name for the hand and toe holds that might have been part of the ancient trail the Dugway replaced. With its steep inclines and 180-degree turns as it drops 1,100 feet to the valley floor, this may seem a hair-raising drive, but when one considers that the ancients may have climbed boulders or clung to hand and toe holds to ascend or descend, the Dugway is positively serene by comparison. At the bottom, a collection of boulders litters the ground close to the bottom of the cliff. Some of these boulders have huge collections of petroglyphs on them, implying that this was an intensively used site.
We call this boulder tipped over rock. Tipped over because now this row of shamanic figures appears to be horizontally stacked, one on top of the other, while the rest of the figures on the rock are more or less vertical. If we spin the photo or turn the camera on its side, the shamans are seen in a more realistic position.
We will probably never know the time span between the creation of the large shamanic figures and the rest of the rock engravings executed after the boulder had tipped. It could be as much as 1,000 years, since these shamanic basketmaker type figures often predate later anasazi rockwork by at least that amount of time.
It's interesting that early archaic basketmaker glyphs are almost always much larger than the glyphs of later periods. Perhaps the glyph makers of later periods were no longer a part of that shamanic tradition. All conjecture, of course. All we can really say is that most rock art glyphs of later periods seems to be smaller. You can see that this boulder was once covered in dirt up until the beginnings of the figures. Whether the dirt washed away after the panel was created, or whether it rolled here and presented itself to the artist, we will never know. This interesting basketmaker figure has quite a small head compared to his feet and hands. His friend seems to be holding some kind of netting. This boulder panel is visually quite striking and has many curious elements. It looks a little like the birthing scene from above, except that it seems to be a birth of rain. This is even underlined by a snake below the glyph, whose presence is often symbolic of water, and by extension, prosperity and abundance. Further to the right, we see something that could be a cloud, blessing the land with life-giving rain. The birthing figure even seems to be connected to the cloud-like image by a lightning bolt. Most intriguing is this purposeful hole, ground an inch into the rock, from which rain seems to be emanating. Could water or some other liquid have been placed in this hole during ceremony? All speculation, to be sure. Powerful images, and taken together, the whole scene implies a strong connection to the powers that bring rain and an overall prosperity for those creating the images.
As a further connection, the top of the boulder in front of this panel has a depression, possibly man-made, where rainwater collects.
The rest of the panel includes sheep, rain figures, and an enigmatic hand with 7 fingers. We like to imagine those 7 fingers belong to the shaman who created this panel, and we are certain this invocation for moisture works so well that it was the cause of the giant boulder tipping over when it had its footing washed away. Other boulders are so filled with glyphs that it is sometimes a challenge to visually separate them out.
We can imagine one generation after another adding the glyphs that represented things of importance to them. This may explain why we so often find panels crowded with glyphs, while nearby are blank surfaces that would have been equally suitable. The crowded panels are, perhaps, a clan's record of their presence in this location.
One of the curious motifs on many of these panels are the figures with duck heads. We saw a small figure above at the birthing panel, but here the duck people are scattered all over the place. Some researchers say that ducks have long been associated with shamanism, and that in some Rio Grande pueblos, They serve as seed bearers and messengers to the rain gods. They can even be thought of as assuming the role of gods. Here, a series of dotted wavy lines crosses much of the panel and seems to have been superimposed on the other glyphs at a later time. And this very large dotted bighorn sheep seems to have been added somewhat recently, perhaps by the Navajos who came into this area after the last of these ancient peoples had migrated elsewhere. And this glyph of 4 spirals suggests the migration stories to the 4 directions as told by the historical Hopi, Zuni, and other descendants of these people.
So many glyphs over so many years, so much movement and migration, the ebb and flow of lives and dreams and right relation to the earth recorded here. And now we record the record, becoming in our own small way part of that flow.